Over the years, I've probably had more than my fair share of in-flight emergencies. I've had engine failures, vacuum pump failures, more weather-related emergencies than I care to list. But one of the most challenging was the night I was flying a Cessna 210 over the Sahara Desert en route from Agadir, Morocco, 1,800 miles down to the Ivory Coast, where I lost my alternator about 3 hours into it. Let me tell you, that turned into one really long night. So what I want to talk to you today about is what to do if you lose your alternator in flight. Now, first of all, a couple of basics. What is your alternator power? Basically, everything that uses electricity in your airplane. Lights, beacons, strobe lights, pitot heat, some of your engine instruments, fuel gauges for sure, radios, nav aids, flaps, landing gear, stuff like that. Luckily, it doesn't power your magnetos. They are independently powered, and so if you lose your entire electrical system, at least your engine will keep running, which is nice. So how do you know if you've lost your alternator? Well, if you're lucky, you're flying a plane that has an RBL that will tell you. Oh, an RBL is a really bad light. Those are the little red lights on the instrument panel you never want to see. That tell you when bad stuff is happening. In this case, it'll say low voltage. Now, if you're flying a plane without an RBL system, you're going to have to keep an eye on your ammeter. And that's kind of tough for a couple of reasons. Number one reason, most pilots don't pay much attention to it because it rarely changes. And it's actually pretty tough to see. It's a little tiny gauge up on your instrument stack with a line in the middle that says 0 and a little needle. And if the needle's on the positive side of 0, your battery's charging and your alternator is working. And if it drops below 0, that means your alternator's probably failed, or maybe your voltage regulator. Now to check that, if you suspect you've lost your alternator, turn something on that uses a lot of power, like a landing light or your pitot heat. If you've lost your alternator, that needle will swing way below 0 and stay there. And that'll tell you, yep, you've lost your alternator. Now, of course, immediately turn that off again, your landing light or your pitot heat, because you're now running on battery power and you want to save that for your destination. And if you haven't been keeping a good close eye on your ammeter, the next thing that's going to happen is your lights are going to start to get dim and your radio is going to get weak and scratchy. Now, let's hope it doesn't come to this, because at this stage of the game, that means your alternator went out a while ago and you've been running on battery power and your battery power is almost gone. So what do you do once you've determined that you've lost your alternator? Well, you want to immediately start turning things off. And I mean right away. Don't call ATC and declare an emergency. Don't put 77 or 7600 on your transponder. Don't get out your checklist. Don't do anything. Start turning stuff off. Lights, rotating beacon, strobe lights, those use a ton of power. Pitot heat, if you're not in icing conditions, that uses the most power of anything. Any radios you're not using. Anything anybody's got plugged into cigarette lighters that you don't need. Turn all that stuff off before you do anything. Because remember, all of the power you have left is in your battery. And think of your battery as a bucket of electricity. And everything that you're using is like a hole in that bucket. And you want to save that electricity for when you're going to really need it, which is at your destination. So turn everything off you don't absolutely have to have. Once you've done that, then take stock of your situation. How far are you from the nearest airport? Is it really close and you can go ahead and land and it's not really a big deal? Or are you hours from safety and you really got to be careful with what electricity you have left? Once you've determined your situation, then you can make a course of action. If you're on flight following or IFR, you might want to make a call and let them know what's happening. But only if you think you've got the electricity to spare. Making a call to ATC is not mandatory in this situation. Remember, they can't really help you. You are on your own, and that electricity in your battery is all you have left. You're not going to get any more, and calling ATC isn't going to help. If you've got the juice, give them a call quick. Tell them what's happened, give them your ETA to your destination, and then shut the heck up. Don't answer any more questions. Because every time you transmit on that radio, you use a ton of power. The night I lost my alternator over the Sahara, I turned everything off in the cockpit I didn't need, and the last thing I did was called ATC to tell them what was going to happen to me. They weren't going to hear from me for the rest of the night. And as soon as I keyed the mic, everything went dark. That drained the last of the electricity in my battery. So it was a useless gesture. They didn't hear my call, plus I drained my battery completely. So think carefully before you give ATC a call. And I know you're going to freak out. Well, you have to tell ATC what are they going to do? Well, if your transponder goes out and you don't answer their radio calls, they're going to figure it out that you're no radio. They have procedures for that. They'll clear the airspace from your current position to your destination according to your flight plan, and it'll work just fine. Calling them really isn't going to help much. It just makes them feel better. It's not going to help your situation at all. So don't start freaking out. Remember, if you leave stuff on and you make a lot of radio calls, if you've got any distance to go, if you're going to be in the air for a while, you're going to burn through your battery and you're going to go dark anyway. So you might as well turn it off while you're en route to your destination. So remember, that's where you're going to need your electricity, at your destination. That's where you're going to need a radio to contact a tower, or if you're going into an uncontrolled airport at night, bring up the runway lights. If you're IFR, you're going to need power to run your radios to shoot an approach. Okay? If you're flying at night and you're prepared, by prepared, I mean you brought along a couple of headlamps or flashlights and spare batteries, turn all your interior lights off. Save the electricity. That's not going to do any good. Flying by flashlight is not a big deal. And you want to make sure you bring headlamps along with a red lens if at all possible. Saves your night vision a little bit. They're much better than flashlights. Back in the 90s when I lost my alternator over the air, all I had was my mini mag light because we didn't really have headlamps back then. And this thing was really inconvenient to use because I had to hand fly for the rest of the night because, and another thing you're going to need to turn off is your autopilot because it uses a lot of electricity too. And if you're in IMC conditions, that means you're going to be flying by flashlight or headlamp, and flashlight was not very convenient. Eventually, I was able to stick it in the headliner above me and shine down on my engine instruments, but I would have given anything for an actual headlamp that night. And two of them. When I had to change batteries in the flashlight, that was kind of inconvenient. Other things at night, like I mentioned, you got to turn off your outside lights. I know that's going to freak you out too. What if somebody hits you? Well, save your lights for your destination. If you've got a long way to go, they're going to die anyway. You're going to want your outside lights on at your destination, which is an airport. That's where most of the airplanes are. You're not going to be running into a lot of traffic hours from your airport in between, on your cross country. But when you get into a traffic pattern, that's when you're more than likely going to encounter other airplanes. So save your electricity for your destination. Other things you're going to want to save your electricity for is extending your landing gear. Although, if you've got a retractable landing gear, you're more than likely going to have to pump that gear down manually anyway, but it's nice to have a little electricity left so you get 3 green lights when your gear is down and locked. Remember, if your battery is completely dead, when you pump that landing gear down, you're not going to get 3 greens. When I had to pump my gear down in that 210 that night, or the next morning I should say, my battery was completely dead, and I had no way of knowing if my gear was actually down and locked. My landing was kind of like that versus a big relief. It didn't collapse, but I was a little scared. Other things to think of, if you're IFR, if you're actually in the clouds, IMC conditions, if your destination's the same, if you're going to be in clouds and IMC the whole way, do you have to be? Take a look at your iPad if you've got ADS-B in, if you got real weather. See if there's VFR conditions somewhere else. ATC would love it if you diverted into VFR conditions, landed in column, rather than 2 hours of no radio contact through the clouds. Okay. Speaking of iPad, if you lose your alternator, it really helps if you come prepared, like having an iPad with ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot on it. Fully charged iPad will get you a couple hours of navigation, no problem if you have to turn all your nav aids off. Having a battery backup will extend that for probably more time than you have gas for. Other thing to have along that's really handy, handheld radio. If you have to turn off your radios, your handheld will come in really handy. Plus a cell phone. You can actually look up a number on ForeFlight and call ATC or center and communicate with them that way if you've got signal. You probably have to be flying kind of low for that to work, but it's an option. Okay, well, that's what you can do if you lose your alternator in flight. Remember, turn everything off that you don't need immediately. Save what's left in your battery for your destination. It helps if you come prepared with headlamps, spare batteries, iPad with ForeFlight or Garmin Pilot on it, spare batteries for that, and a handheld radio, if you've got all that stuff, losing your alternator is pretty much a non-issue. Now, if any of you guys out there have some other tips or tricks, please tell me. Put them in the comments below. I'm always willing to learn. And thanks for watching the video and supporting the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. And as always, keep your speed up.